You went to school. You sat in rows. You raised your hand when you had a question. You memorized the answers. You passed the exams. And somewhere along the way, someone told you that this process, all of it, was making you smarter. But here is a question worth sitting with. What if it wasn't? What if the education system you moved through, the one that graded you and sorted you and told you whether you were capable or not, was never primarily designed to develop your intelligence at all? Most people follow the same path without ever questioning it. You go to school, then university, then a career. And the assumption threaded through all of it is that education is the mechanism by which people become capable, thoughtful, independent thinkers. This belief is so deeply embedded that it rarely surfaces as a belief. It feels more like a fact, like gravity. The more education you receive, the smarter and more prepared you become. And the less education you have, the further behind you fall. Society organizes itself around this idea. Parents sacrifice for it. Families relocate for it. Entire economies are structured around the credential it produces. But there is something underneath this assumption that most people never examine. Not because it is hidden exactly, but because it is so ordinary, so woven into daily life that it becomes invisible. Here is the inversion. Large institutions, governments, corporations, economies do not primarily exist to maximize human potential. They exist to create stability, predictability, continuity. An institution needs people who can follow a process reliably, show up consistently, perform a task correctly and repeatedly, work within a hierarchy without constant friction. These are not bad qualities. They are functional ones. They keep complex systems running, but they are not the same as intelligence. And when you look carefully at how modern education systems actually operate, you begin to see that they were shaped not entirely by what develops the human mind, but by what serves institutional need. Consider the mechanisms: standardized testing, grading systems, rigid schedules, authority hierarchies, memorization as the primary learning method. Each of these structures, taken individually, might seem reasonable, but together they form a pattern. They reward one kind of behavior consistently, not curiosity, not experimentation, not the willingness to question a premise or sit with uncertainty. They reward correctness, compliance, the ability to produce the expected answer at the expected time in the expected format. A student who memorizes and reproduces scores well. A student who questions the question, who wanders intellectually, who needs more time to form a genuinely original thought. That student is marked down, marked behind, sometimes marked as a problem. The grading system does not say your thinking is unusual. Let's understand it. It says this was not the answer. This did not happen by accident. The modern education system, as most people experience it today, was largely shaped during the Industrial Revolution. Factories were expanding. Cities were filling with workers. Economies needed people who could follow schedules, take direction, repeat tasks, and function inside large coordinated systems without requiring constant individual supervision. Schools began to mirror this structure with striking precision. Bells signaling the start and end of periods. Desks arranged in uniform rows. Teachers positioned at the front as the sole authority. Subjects divided into rigid blocks of time. Students expected to move together, at the same pace, through the same material. The similarity between the factory floor and the classroom was not coincidental. It was architectural. The school was, in many ways, a preparation environment, not primarily for intellectual life, but for institutional life. And what this environment trains, quietly, over years, is a very particular relationship to thinking itself. You learn that mistakes are punished, not in every classroom, not by every teacher, but the system as a whole encodes this. A wrong answer costs you. A failed test stays on your record. The stakes of being wrong are made visible and consequential from an early age. So you learn to be careful, to stay close to what is known, to reproduce what has already been approved, rather than risk the exposure of being genuinely wrong. You learn that curiosity, while politely tolerated, tends to slow things down. There is a curriculum to complete, a syllabus, a schedule. The class that moves too slowly because of questions does not finish. And not finishing is its own kind of failure. And so curiosity, that restless, wandering, inefficient quality that drives actual discovery, gets quietly trained out of many people. Not through cruelty, through structure. Here is something worth knowing. Some of the most consequential thinkers in recorded history struggled profoundly inside formal education systems, not because they lacked intelligence, but because their intelligence was operating differently. They needed to experiment rather than memorize, to connect distant ideas rather than master isolated subjects, to move at irregular speeds, slow in some areas, accelerated in others. The institutional structure had no room for that shape of mind. Real innovation requires the willingness to be wrong repeatedly, to follow an idea into uncertain territory without knowing if it will produce anything of value, to sit with a question long after most people would have accepted the standard answer. These qualities are genuinely valuable, but large institutions do not primarily reward them. They reward people who can perform reliably inside an existing system, and education, shaped to serve those institutions, tends to measure the same. If you struggled in school, it may be worth re-examining what that actually meant. Not to assign blame. Not to dismiss what education does provide, because it provides real things. But to question the story that followed you out of it. That you were not smart enough, not disciplined enough, not capable enough. Because the system you were moving through was not measuring your full intelligence. It was measuring your compatibility with a particular structure, your ability to perform within a specific set of constraints. And for many people, perhaps more than statistics ever captured, the misfit was not a failure of their mind, it was a mismatch in shape. Understanding this does not change the institutions. They are large and old and self-sustaining, and awareness alone does not restructure them. But it can change something quieter and more personal. How you understand your own history. How you relate to the moments when you didn't fit. When you were too slow, or too distracted, or too interested in the wrong things, or too full of questions that didn't appear on the test. Systems are not neutral. They are built. They carry within them the priorities of whoever built them and the era in which they were constructed. And once you can see a system clearly, not as natural law but as a human construction with a specific purpose, something shifts. You stop measuring yourself entirely by its standards. And in that space, something that was always there becomes a little more visible, not what the system said you were, but what you actually are. That, perhaps, is where intelligence, real intelligence, finally gets room to begin.